This is a photograph of the famous designer and manager Kelly Johnson on the right, and Kelly was the mentor of Ben Rich. You see him, they're both in front of a U2 here. This happens to be a big barn of a building out on the Sierra Highway in Palmdale, where the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works is located. Next, please. These are many of the designs that were created by Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. Some of you may not be aware of this. This is called the Sea Shadow. It was a stealth ship for the U.S. Navy. Once they signed the ship and it was launched, the Navy cruised around and they really didn't know what to do with it. So according to Ben Rich, they put it in mothballs. The Ben Rich lecture was in 1993. I had the opportunity to listen to him speak. He was supposedly just going to talk about the history of Lockheed Martin. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right there. During this presentation, he showed a number of slides that showed the history of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. And I showed you several of them earlier. During his presentation, he said, if you can imagine it, Lockheed Martin has done it. Well, I have a big imagination. I was a science fiction fan when I grew up. So you can imagine sort of the things that were going through my mind at this point. Incidentally, he repeated that twice more. Next slide. Okay. Then, later on during his presentation, he asked the audience of about 150 people. He said, how are we going to get to the stars? And he answered his own question. Not by using rockets and chemical propellants. Does that make sense? We'll never get there. He says, but you have to use a new technology. Next. Then he said, a little later, Lockheed Martin now has the technology to go to the stars. All you had to do was read between the lines. He was telling me, the science fiction fan, hey, we've done it. We have this technology and we're using it. Next slide, please. All right. His final slide in the presentation was this. A flying disc. And then he said, who knows what Lockheed Martin may be working on next. Next slide, please. Can you handle the truth? Now listen to what Jim Goodall, a very close friend of Ben Rich, said as Ben Rich approached his death. Now in 1993, Ben Rich had cancer. He died less than 2 years later. Is this almost a deathbed confession? Listen to this.
Now, a dear friend of mine was named Ben R. Rich. He replaced Kelly Johnson at the Lockheed Skunk Works. And about 10 days before he died, I was speaking to Ben, but he told me, he said, Jim, we have things out in the desert that are 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. They have about 4,500 people at the Lockheed Skunk Works. What have they been doing for the last 20-some-odd years?
Now there's one thing that you might have missed in there, because it came fast, I know. At the end of Ben Rich's lecture, there were a number of questions, obviously, and then he decided to leave the room. A friend of mine, the friend of mine who invited me to attend this, followed him to the back door. And just as Ben Rich was exiting, he said, my friend said to Ben Rich, "Tell me, how do UFOs work?" And Ben Rich said, "Tell me this." He said, "How does ESP work?" And my friend said, "Well, everything in space-time is connected." And Rich said, "That's how UFOs work."